The moment my dad asked me that question, I felt my entire world tilt sideways. We were sitting in his living room in Portland, Oregon, the same house where I'd grown up, where my sister Claire and I had built blanket forts and fought over the TV remote. The familiar smell of his coffee and the sound of rain against the windows should have felt comforting, but instead, everything felt wrong. $100,000, Megan. What did you do with it? I stared at him, my mouth going completely dry. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I could feel my heart starting to race in that panicky way that makes you feel like you're drowning on dry land. $100,000? What are you talking about, Dad? But even as I said it, I could see something shifting in his expression. That look of confusion mixing with disappointment, the same look he'd given me when I was 16 and came home 2 hours past curfew reeking of cheap beer. Except this time, I had no idea what I'd supposedly done. Before you go any further, I need you to know something. This story gets dark, and it gets complicated, and by the end, you might question everything you think you know about family loyalty and revenge. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, if you've ever had your life turned upside down by a lie, then please hit that subscribe button right now. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story, it might be yours too, in ways you never imagined. Claire was sitting across from us on the old leather couch, and when Dad asked that question, I watched her face go absolutely white. Not pale, white. Like someone had drained every drop of blood from her body in an instant. Her hands were gripping her coffee mug so tightly I thought it might shatter, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I knew. That's when the first cold finger of realization started creeping up my spine. Dad, I seriously have no idea what you're talking about. What $100,000? My father, David Collins, was 68 years old and sharp as a tack. He'd run his own accounting firm for 30 years before retiring, and he didn't make mistakes with numbers. Ever. When he looked at me with those gray eyes that had always seen right through me, I knew he was dead serious. The money I gave Claire to give to you 6 months ago, for your down payment. The room went so quiet I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the same clock that had counted down the seconds of my childhood. But now it felt like it was counting down to something terrible. I turned to look at my sister, really look at her, and what I saw there made my stomach drop into my shoes. Guilt. Pure, unmistakable guilt written all over her face. Her green eyes, so much like mine, were wide with panic, and her hands were actually shaking now. Claire? My voice came out as barely a whisper. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she managed to get words out, but they were all wrong. Megan, I can explain, and that's when I knew my life was about to implode. You see, 6 months ago, I'd been desperately trying to buy my first house. I'm 32 years old, and I'd been saving for years, working double shifts as a nurse at Providence Medical Center, eating ramen for dinner more nights than I care to count. I was $20,000 short of what I needed for a down payment on this little craftsman house in southeast Portland that I'd fallen in love with. It had a blue door and a front porch where I could picture myself drinking coffee on Sunday mornings, and a backyard perfect for the dog I'd always wanted to get. I'd mentioned it to Claire during one of our weekly coffee dates at our favorite spot on Hawthorne Boulevard. She'd listened to me talk about how heartbroken I was that I might lose the house, how I'd looked at every possible loan option, how I was even considering asking our parents for help but felt too proud and too scared of being a burden. Don't worry about it, Meg, she'd said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Something will work out. It always does for you. 2 weeks later, the most incredible thing happened. My real estate agent called me with news that felt like a miracle. The sellers had decided to reduce the asking price by exactly $20,000. They'd apparently had another deal fall through and were motivated to close quickly. It was like the universe had aligned perfectly to make my dream possible. I cried in my car in the parking lot of the real estate office. Happy tears, grateful tears, tears of pure relief. I called Claire immediately to tell her, and she was so excited, so happy for me. We celebrated that night with expensive wine and takeout from our favorite Thai place, and she kept saying how proud she was of me, how I deserved every bit of happiness that was coming my way. But sitting in my father's living room 6 months later, staring at my sister's guilty face, I realized that miracle hadn't been a miracle at all. "You told him you gave it to me," I said slowly, the pieces starting to come together in my mind like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Claire's face crumpled. She started crying then, these ugly, desperate sobs that shook her whole body. "Megan, I'm so sorry. I was going to tell you, I swear I was, but then time kept passing and it got harder and harder, and I didn't know how." My dad was looking between us with growing horror, the realization dawning on him too. "Claire, what did you do with that money?" The silence stretched out like a rubber band about to snap. Outside, the Portland rain kept falling, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of traffic on Powell Boulevard, people going about their normal Wednesday afternoon lives while mine fell apart. When Claire finally spoke, her voice was so small I could barely hear her. "I lost it." 3 words. 3 simple words that changed everything. "You lost it." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, like it was coming from somewhere far away. God, Megan, I can't. I made some bad investments. Really bad investments. And I thought I could make it back before anyone found out, but everything just kept getting worse, and Marcus threatened to leave me if I didn't figure it out, and I panicked. Marcus, her husband of 4 years, the man who'd charmed our whole family, who I'd been maid of honor for at their wedding, who'd become like a brother to me. The successful financial advisor who lived in a beautiful house in Lake Oswego and drove a BMW and always picked up the check at dinner. "Marcus knows about this?" I asked. More silence. More guilt written across her face. That's when I understood that this betrayal was bigger than I'd thought. This wasn't just my sister making one terrible decision. This was calculated. This was planned. This was a conspiracy between the 2 people I'd trusted most in the world besides our parents. If you're still watching this, if you're still following along with this nightmare, I need you to do something for me. I need you to think about the person in your life you trust the most. The person you'd give your last dollar to, the person whose kids you'd take in if something happened to them, the person you call when everything goes wrong. Now imagine that person stealing from you and lying to your face for months while you thank them for their support. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to tell you next gets so much worse, and I need to know I'm not alone in this. My father stood up slowly, his face gray with shock and disappointment. At 68, he'd survived a heart attack 3 years earlier, and I could see this news hitting him like another one. "Dad, sit down," I said, jumping up to help him, but he waved me away. $90,000, he said quietly. That was most of what your mother and I had saved for our retirement trip to Ireland. The trip she talked about every day before the cancer took her. My mom had died 2 years ago after a brutal 18-month fight with pancreatic cancer. In her final weeks, when the pain was so bad, she couldn't sleep, she'd made me promise to make sure Dad took that trip to Ireland. She'd wanted him to see the cliffs of Moher and kiss the Blarney Stone and visit the little village where her grandmother had been born. She'd made me write it down, made me swear I'd make sure he went. And Claire had stolen the money for it. I felt something breaking inside my chest, something that had been holding me together for the past 2 years since Mom died. The careful balance I'd maintained between grief and hope, between taking care of everyone else and taking care of myself, between being the good daughter and the good sister and the good nurse who fixed everyone's problems. "Claire, how could you?" The words came out as a whisper, but they might as well have been a scream. She was sobbing harder now, her whole body shaking. I know, I'm the worst person in the world, but Megan, you have to understand, I was desperate. Marcus said his clients were furious and threatening to sue, and we could have lost everything, the house, the cars, everything. So, you stole from Dad instead? You stole Mom's Ireland money. I was going to pay it back. I swear on Mom's grave, I was going to pay it back with interest as soon as the investments turned around. But I could see in her face that the investments hadn't turned around. They'd probably gotten worse. And suddenly I was wondering what else she'd taken, what other lies she'd told, what other betrayals were waiting to be uncovered. My dad sat back down heavily, and I could see him aging in real time. The shock was taking years off his life, right in front of me. There's more, isn't there, Claire? I said, my voice getting steadier as my anger started to build. This isn't the only lie. The look she gave me then was pure terror. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was right. What I didn't know was just how deep this rabbit hole went, or how far I was willing to fall into it to get my revenge. But I was about to find out. The next few hours passed like a fever dream. After Claire's breakdown in Dad's living room, she started talking, and once she started, she couldn't stop. It was like watching a dam burst. All the lies and deceptions came pouring out in a flood that left me feeling like I was drowning. The $100,000 was just the beginning. Over the past 18 months, while I'd been working myself to exhaustion and eating ramen dinners to save money for my house, while I'd been grieving our mother and taking care of our father, Claire and Marcus had been systematically stealing from our family. First, it was small things. She'd convinced Dad to let her handle some of his bill payments when he was overwhelmed with grief after Mom's funeral. She'd been skimming money from his accounts, small amounts at first, then larger ones as Marcus's investment schemes got more desperate. Then she'd somehow gotten access to Mom's jewelry, the pieces Dad had put in a safety deposit box because he couldn't bear to look at them yet. Mom's engagement ring, the pearl necklace Dad had given her for their 25th anniversary, the vintage watch that had belonged to my grandmother. All of it sold to cover Marcus's losses. But the worst part, the part that made me physically sick, was learning about Aunt Rose. Mom's sister Rose lived in a memory care facility in Beaverton. She had Alzheimer's, and for the past 5 years, Dad had been supplementing her care costs because her Social Security wasn't enough to cover the specialized facility she needed. It was expensive, $3,000 a month, but Dad never complained because Rose had helped raise Mom after their parents died young. Claire had convinced Dad to let her handle Rose's payments too, claiming it would be easier for her to manage everything electronically. Instead, she'd been pocketing the money and paying only the bare minimum to keep Rose in the facility. They moved her to the state facility 2 months ago, Claire whispered through her tears. I kept meaning to tell Dad, but I didn't know how, and I thought I could fix everything before he found out. The state facility. I knew what that meant. I'd seen patients transferred there from Providence. It wasn't abuse exactly, but it wasn't care either. It was warehousing. Keeping people alive, but not really living. My father's face had gone completely white. Rose was the only family he had left besides Claire and me, and she'd been Mom's best friend and confidant. Mom had made him promise to take care of Rose, just like she'd made me promise about the Ireland trip. Where is she now? He asked, his voice hollow. Hillsdale Manor, Claire said, not meeting his eyes. I'd driven past Hillsdale Manor. It was a gray concrete building that looked more like a prison than a care facility. The thought of gentle, sweet Aunt Rose in that place, confused and scared and wondering why her family had abandoned her, made me want to throw up. But I wasn't done learning about Claire's betrayals. Not even close. Marcus appeared at Dad's house around dinner time, looking every inch the successful financial advisor in his tailored suit and designer glasses. But when he saw all of us sitting in the living room, saw Claire's tear-streaked face and Dad's devastated expression, his confident mask slipped just enough for me to see the panic underneath. Babe, what's going on? He asked, but his voice was too careful, too controlled. Tell him, I said to Claire. Tell him Dad knows about the money. Marcus went very still. I watched him calculate, watched him try to figure out how much we knew and how much he could still lie about. It was like watching a poker player decide whether to bluff with a terrible hand. Finally, he decided to play innocent. What money? Claire, what's she talking about? But I was done with lies. I was done with people I loved treating me like I was stupid. The $100,000 Dad gave Claire to give to me for my house down payment. The money you helped her steal. The money you've both been using to try to cover up whatever mess you've made of your finances. Marcus opened his mouth to deny it, but something in my face must have stopped him. Maybe it was the fact that I was done crying, done being shocked, done playing the victim. Maybe it was the cold fury that had settled over me like ice water. Here's what I want you to understand about betrayal, and please share this video if you've ever felt this way. Betrayal doesn't just hurt. It changes you at a cellular level. It rewrites your DNA. One minute you're the kind of person who gives everyone the benefit of the doubt, who always looks for the good in people, who bends over backward to help the ones you love. The next minute, you're someone else entirely. Someone harder. Someone who sees the world for what it really is instead of what you want it to be. How much? I asked. How much what? Marcus said, but his voice cracked. How much in total? How much have you stolen from my family? The silence stretched out until I thought I might scream. Finally, Claire whispered something so quietly I couldn't hear her. What did you say? Including everything, maybe $300,000. $300,000. Enough to buy a house. Enough to fund a comfortable retirement. Enough to keep Aunt Rose in proper care for 8 years. Enough to destroy a family. My father made a sound I'd never heard before, a kind of wounded animal noise that came from somewhere deep in his chest. He stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the rain for a long time before he spoke. Get out of my house. Dad, please, Claire started. Both of you. Get out of my house and don't come back. Marcus grabbed Claire's arm, and they headed for the door, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Wait, I said, and something in my voice made them both freeze. I want to know exactly what happened to the money. Marcus straightened his tie, trying to recover some of his professional composure. Look, Megan, I know this looks bad, but you have to understand, I was trying to help Claire's whole family. I had some investment opportunities that should have paid off huge, enough to pay everyone back with serious returns. What kind of investments? Cryptocurrency, mostly. Some startup opportunities. High risk, high reward stuff that. You gambled with my family's money. I wouldn't call it gambling exactly. You took my father's retirement savings, my aunt's care money, and money that was supposed to be mine, and you gambled it away on cryptocurrency and startup companies. Marcus's jaw tightened. It's not that simple. But it was exactly that simple. And suddenly I understood something that should have been obvious from the beginning. This wasn't just about bad investments or desperate mistakes. This was about a man who lived beyond his means, who'd built his whole identity on being successful and wealthy, who'd rather destroy his wife's family than admit he was a fraud. I looked at Claire, really looked at her, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. But not fear of getting caught, not fear of consequences. Fear of me. She should have been afraid. I'm going to ask you one more question, I said, and I want the truth. Is there anything else? Any other money, any other lies, any other family members you've stolen from or hurt? Claire's face went even whiter, which I hadn't thought was possible. Claire? My voice was getting dangerous now. Is there anything else? The life insurance, she whispered. What life insurance? Mom's life insurance. The policy Dad didn't know about. The one she set up to pay for your nursing school loans. The room started spinning. Mom had taken out a small life insurance policy when I started nursing school, $50,000 that was supposed to pay off my student loans when I graduated. She'd been so proud of me for going back to school, so determined that I wouldn't start my career buried in debt. I'd wondered why those payments had never come through after she died. I'd assumed there was some bureaucratic delay, some paperwork issue that would eventually get sorted out. I'd been paying those loans myself, $800 a month that kept me broke and eating ramen. You stole Mom's life insurance money too? Claire nodded miserably. That's when something inside me broke completely. Not broke like it had earlier, that was just cracking. This was a complete structural collapse, like a building falling in on itself. I stood up slowly, calmly, and walked over to where Claire and Marcus were standing by the door. They both took an unconscious step backward, and I realized I must have looked terrifying. Good. You stole my mother's final gift to me, I said quietly. You stole my father's retirement. You stole my aunt's dignity. You've been lying to my face for over a year while I thanked you for your support and told everyone what a wonderful sister I had. Megan, please. No. No more talking. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave now, and you're going to think very carefully about whether there are any other surprises I'm going to discover. Because I promise you, I'm going to dig into every corner of your life until I find every penny you've stolen and every lie you've told. Marcus puffed up a little, trying to reclaim some authority. You can't just make threats. That wasn't a threat. That was a promise. Something in my tone made him shut up immediately. After they left, Dad and I sat in silence for a long time. The house felt different now, smaller and sadder, like the walls had absorbed all the ugly truths that had been spoken in them. Finally, he spoke. What are we going to do, Megan? I looked at my father, this man who'd worked his whole life to take care of his family, who'd never cheated on his taxes or his wife or his word, who was now facing the reality that one of his daughters had destroyed everything he'd built. We're going to get it back, I said. All of it. Every penny.
How? I didn't know yet.
But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, listening to the rain and my father's broken breathing, I felt something new settling in my chest. Something cold and patient and absolutely ruthless. If you've ever been pushed too far, if you've ever reached that point where you're not the same person you were an hour ago, then you know exactly what I was feeling. Comment below and let me know. When did someone push you past your breaking point? Because what I was planning to do to Claire and Marcus was going to be methodical, thorough, and completely devastating. And I couldn't wait to get started. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a minute. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, 3 legal pads, and every document I could find related to my family's finances. By sunrise, I'd started building a case that would have made my mother proud. She'd always said I had a mind like a steel trap when I said it to something. The first thing I did was call in sick to work. I had 2 weeks of vacation time saved up, and I was going to need every minute of it. My supervisor, Janet, was understanding. She knew about my mom's death and assumed I was having a grief episode.
She wasn't wrong, exactly.
I was grieving. I was grieving the sister I thought I had, the life I thought I was living, the family I thought I belonged to. But I was also planning a war. I started with the obvious places. Bank records, credit card statements, anything I could access legally. Dad gave me power of attorney for his accounts so I could see exactly what had been taken and when. The pattern was even worse than I'd imagined. For 18 months, Claire had been systematically draining Dad's savings. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $1,200 there, but escalating rapidly in the past 6 months. The dates corresponded perfectly with what I knew about the housing market and Marcus's supposed investment opportunities. Then I got creative. You see, one thing about being a nurse that people don't realize is that you develop a very specific set of skills. You learn to notice details, to spot inconsistencies, to ask the right questions at the right time. You learn to be persistent but patient, to gather information without people realizing they're giving it to you. Most importantly, you learn to stay calm under pressure and think clearly when everything is falling apart. I called the safety deposit box company and learned that Claire had been visiting regularly for months, always with forged documents claiming Dad was too ill to come in person. She'd cleaned out everything of value except for a few pieces that were too distinctive to sell easily. I visited Aunt Rose at Hillsdale Manor, and what I found there broke my heart all over again. She was in a shared room with 3 other patients, all of them parked in wheelchairs in front of a television that was too loud. She didn't recognize me at first. Her Alzheimer's had progressed significantly in the 2 months since she'd been transferred. But when I mentioned Mom's name, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Lily's girl," she said, her eyes focusing on me for the first time. "Where have you been?" "I've been waiting for Lily to visit, but she never comes." I had to excuse myself to cry in the bathroom. Aunt Rose didn't know Mom was dead. In her confused state, she thought her family had simply abandoned her. The staff at Hillsdale confirmed what I already suspected. The payments for Rose's care had been sporadic and insufficient for months. They were on the verge of moving her to an even cheaper facility, basically a place where people go to die. But I also learned something interesting from her social worker. Claire hadn't just been skipping payments. She'd been claiming that Dad was suffering from dementia and could no longer make financial decisions. She'd used this lie to gain access to accounts and documents she shouldn't have been able to touch. That's when I realized this wasn't just theft. It was identity fraud, elder abuse, and probably a dozen other felonies I hadn't even thought of yet. If you're still with me, If you're still following this journey into the darkest corners of family betrayal, I need you to do something. I need you to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell because what I discovered next is going to change everything you think you know about the people we trust most. And I promise you, by the end of the story, you're going to understand exactly why revenge isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's about getting justice. My next stop was Marcus's office. Pinnacle Financial Advisors was located in a gleaming high-rise in downtown Portland, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. Marcus's office was on the 15th floor with a view of the river, and his assistant, a young woman named Jessica with perfect makeup and nervous energy, clearly knew something was wrong the moment I walked in. "I'm here to see Marcus Hamilton," I told her. "Do you have an appointment?" "He's very busy today." "I'm his sister-in-law. It's urgent." Something in my tone made her decide not to argue. She buzzed Marcus's office, and I heard her having a whispered conversation before she hung up. "He'll be with you in just a moment." I sat in the waiting area and observed. The office was expensive, too expensive. The furniture, the artwork, the marble floors, everything screamed money. But I was starting to understand the difference between having money and spending money you don't have. When Marcus finally came out, he looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie was crooked, and there were dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there the day before. "Megan, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk. Privately." He hesitated, then led me back to his office. It was even more impressive than the lobby. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, awards and certifications covering the walls. But I noticed something interesting. His computer screen was open to what looked like cryptocurrency trading platforms, and there were printouts scattered across his desk showing nothing but red numbers. "Look, about yesterday." "How much do you owe?" I interrupted. "Excuse me? How much do you owe?" "Total. To everyone." Marcus straightened his tie and tried to put on his professional mask, but I could see the cracks in it. "I don't think that's really any of your business. You made it my business when you stole my family's money. So I'll ask again. How much do you owe?" The silence stretched out. Finally, he slumped back in his chair like a deflated balloon. "A lot. More than a lot." "Give me a number." Between the margin calls and the client losses and the other obligations, probably close to $2 million. $2 million. I felt dizzy. This wasn't just gambling with cryptocurrency. This was systematic fraud on a massive scale. Other obligations? Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. Some private investors. People who aren't banks. Loan sharks. He owed money to loan sharks. Suddenly, Claire's desperation made more sense. It wasn't just about losing their comfortable lifestyle, it was about physical safety. But I didn't feel sorry for them. Not even a little bit. "Here's what I want to know," I said, leaning forward. "I want to know every penny you took from my family when you took it and what you did with it. I want a complete accounting." "Megan, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly. You're a fraud and a thief who destroyed my family to try to cover up your own failures. What I don't understand is why you thought you could get away with it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then he did something I didn't expect. He started talking. Not because he wanted to confess, but because he needed someone to understand how clever he thought he'd been. It's amazing how arrogance makes people stupid. He told me about the elaborate lies he'd told Claire about the investment opportunities, how he'd convinced her that borrowing from her family was actually protecting them from market volatility. He told me about the fake documents he'd created showing profitable returns on investments that had actually failed months ago. He told me about the shell companies he'd set up to hide money transfers, the fake client accounts he'd created to cover up losses. But most importantly, he told me about the evidence. "I kept records of everything," he said, almost proudly. "Every transaction, every transfer, every investment. I had to, in case the SEC ever came sniffing around." "Where are the records?" "Safe deposit box. Different bank from your dad's." I filed that information away for later. Marcus was the kind of criminal who thought he was smarter than everyone else, the kind who kept detailed records of his own crimes because he was convinced he'd never get caught. When I left his office, I had everything I needed to start building a criminal case. But I also had something else, a plan that was bigger and more comprehensive than just getting the money back. I was going to destroy them completely. That evening, I called my best friend Sarah, who happened to be a criminal defense attorney. We'd been friends since nursing school. She dropped out after the first semester to go to law school, but we'd stayed close over the years. I need a favor, I told her. A big one. What kind of favor? The kind where you help me take down a financial fraud scheme that's destroyed my family. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Are we talking about legal help or? Legal help.
I want to do this right.
I want them prosecuted, convicted, and sent to prison. But I also want to make sure they can never hurt anyone else. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about the money, the lies, the forged documents, the elder abuse. I told her about Aunt Rose sitting in that terrible facility and Dad's broken dreams of Ireland and my student loans that were supposed to have been paid off by my dead mother's love. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a long time. Megan, what they did, this isn't just theft. This is organized financial fraud, elder abuse, identity theft. We're talking about serious federal charges. Good. But if we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. We need evidence, documentation, witnesses. We need to build an airtight case. I'm already working on it. And we need to think about the personal cost. Claire is your sister. This is going to destroy her life.
I thought about that.
I thought about the sister who'd held my hand during Mom's funeral, who'd helped me move into my first apartment, who'd been my maid of honor at my wedding to Tom before our divorce 2 years ago. I thought about all the times she'd told me she loved me, all the family dinners where she'd sat across from Dad and listened to him talk about his retirement plans while knowing she'd already stolen the money to make them possible. She destroyed her own life. I said finally. I'm just going to make sure everyone knows about it. By the time I hung up the phone, I had a list of lawyers to contact, investigators to hire, and government agencies to notify. I had a timeline for building the case and a strategy for maximizing the chances of criminal prosecution. But I also had something else. I had a burning desire to watch Claire and Marcus face the consequences of what they'd done, not just to me and Dad, but to everyone they'd hurt. Because, as I was about to discover, we weren't their only victims. Not even close. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes after you've accepted that your life has been fundamentally altered. There was no going back to the person I'd been 3 days ago, the person who trusted people at face value and believed family meant something sacred. That person was gone, and in her place was someone harder, smarter, and absolutely relentless. I started the day by calling Jessica, Marcus's assistant. Pinnacle Financial Advisors. This is Jessica speaking. Hi, Jessica. This is Megan Collins. I was in yesterday to see Marcus. I'm actually looking into some investment opportunities, and I was wondering if you might have time for a quick coffee? I have some questions about how the firm operates, and I think you might be able to help me understand things better. There was a pause. I don't know if I should. Nothing confidential, I said quickly. Just general information about the types of services you offer. I'm a nurse, so I don't really understand the financial world, and Marcus can be a little intimidating. I thought maybe you could help me figure out if I'm asking the right questions. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, but also something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or concern, I guess. I could meet you for a few minutes. There's a coffee shop in the building lobby. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Jessica in a generic corporate coffee shop, watching her fidget with her latte and trying to figure out how to approach what I really wanted to know. So, I said carefully, how long have you been working for Marcus? About 2 years. Since right after I graduated from PSU. Do you like it? The work, Jessica looked around nervously, then leaned closer. Can I ask you something? Are you really thinking about investing with him? Or is this about something else? I studied her face. She was young, maybe 24, with a kind of earnest expression that suggested she still believed in things like honesty and fairness. But there was worry there too, the kind of worry that comes from seeing things that don't add up. Why do you ask? Because. She looked around again, then whispered, because I don't think you should invest with him. I don't think anyone should invest with him. My heart started racing.
What do you mean?
I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I've been looking for another job for months. There are things happening at the office that don't seem right. What kind of things? Jessica glanced around the coffee shop one more time, then pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. It was a screenshot of what looked like a client account statement, but the numbers had been whited out and different numbers written in by hand. I found this in the printer last week. Someone had been altering client statements before sending them out. And that's not the worst part. She swiped to another photo. This one showed a stack of documents with different signatures on them, but when I looked closely, I could see they were all in the same handwriting. He's been forging client signatures on investment authorizations. I've seen him do it. And some of the clients, I don't think they even know their money is being invested. Some of them are elderly, and when they call, they sound confused about things Marcus claims they agreed to. My blood ran cold. This was bigger than I'd thought. Much bigger. Jessica, how many clients are we talking about? Maybe 50 or 60 active accounts. But I think some of them might be fake. Like, I've never met them, never spoken to them on the phone, but their accounts show huge balances and regular transactions. Do you have copies of any of this? She nodded slowly. I've been taking pictures of things just in case. My boyfriend works in IT, and he told me I should document everything if I thought something illegal was happening. Would you be willing to share those with me?
Why?
Are you a cop or something? I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to trust her with the truth. Marcus is married to my sister. They've been stealing money from my family for over a year. My father, my aunt, me, they've taken hundreds of thousands of dollars and used it to try to cover up Marcus's losses. I'm building a case to have them prosecuted. Jessica stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That makes sense. I always wondered how he could afford that lifestyle when so many of his investments were losing money. You'll help me? Hell yes, I'll help you. Do you know how many elderly people call that office crying because their retirement accounts are empty? Do you know how many times I've had to lie to clients because Marcus told me to? Over the next hour, Jessica told me everything. The fake accounts, the forged documents, the elderly clients who were being systematically drained of their life savings. She showed me photos of altered statements, recordings she'd made of Marcus coaching her on what lies to tell clients, and a list of account numbers that corresponded to people who might not even exist. There's something else, she said as we were getting ready to leave. Yesterday, after you left, Marcus spent like 3 hours on the phone with someone. He was yelling, and I heard him say something about needing more time, that he was close to making everything right. And then he said something about insurance money. Insurance money. My stomach dropped. What kind of insurance money? I don't know, but he mentioned a fire. Something about a fire making everything go away. I felt like I was going to throw up. Jessica, I need you to do something for me. I need you to copy every document you can get your hands on, and I need you to start looking for another job immediately. If Marcus is talking about insurance fraud involving fires, this is about to get very dangerous. You think he'd actually? I think he's desperate enough to do anything. And desperate people make terrible decisions. After Jessica left, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, trying to process what I'd learned. This wasn't just about my family anymore. Marcus had been running a systematic fraud operation that had probably hurt dozens of people. Elderly people, people who trusted him with their life savings, people who might now be facing poverty because of his greed. I called Sarah immediately. We have a problem, I told her. A much bigger problem than I thought. What kind of problem? The kind where Marcus might be planning to burn down his office to collect insurance money and destroy evidence. Jesus, Megan. Are you serious? Dead serious. And there are dozens of victims we don't know about yet. This is organized financial fraud on a massive scale. Okay, we need to move fast. I'm going to call a contact at the FBI. This is beyond local police now. Wait. Before you do that, I want to try something first. Megan, if you're thinking about confronting him, I'm not going to confront him. I'm going to set a trap. Here's what I want you to understand about revenge, and please Please share this video if you've ever been in a situation where someone you trusted turned out to be a monster. Revenge isn't just about getting even. Sometimes revenge is about protecting other people from the same harm you experienced. Sometimes revenge is about making sure that the person who hurt you can never hurt anyone else again. That afternoon, I drove to Claire and Marcus's house in Lake Oswego. It was a beautiful house, the kind of place that screams success and financial security. Manicured lawn, 3-car garage, swimming pool in the backyard. The kind of house I dreamed of owning someday, back when I thought hard work and saving money were enough to build a good life. Now I knew it was all built on stolen money. My family's money. Other families' money. The retirement savings of elderly people who trusted Marcus to take care of them. Claire's car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. I rang the doorbell and waited. When she opened the door, she looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying.
Good.
I hoped she hadn't slept either. Megan, what are you doing here? I came to give you a chance. A chance for what? A chance to tell me the truth about everything. All of it. Every lie, every theft, every person you and Marcus have hurt. Claire stepped back, and I could see fear in her face. I already told you everything yesterday. No, you didn't. You told me about Dad, and Aunt Rose and me. But you didn't tell me about Marcus's other victims. You didn't tell me about the elderly clients he's been stealing from. You didn't tell me about the forged documents and the fake accounts. The color drained from her face completely. How do you? It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that you have one chance, to do the right thing before this gets so much worse for both of you. What do you want? I want a complete confession. I want the names of every person you've stolen from. I want access to Marcus's records. And I want every penny returned to every victim. Claire started crying again, but these weren't the desperate sobs from yesterday. These were the tears of someone who knew she was trapped. We can't. We don't have the money. Marcus owes millions to people who will kill us if we don't pay them back. That's not my problem. Megan, please, you're my sister.
No.
The word came out harder than I'd intended. Sisters don't steal from each other. Sisters don't lie to each other for over a year. Sisters don't destroy their family's future to cover up their husband's crimes. I stepped closer to her, and she actually flinched. You have 24 hours to decide. Either you help me get justice for everyone you've hurt, or I turn everything I know over to the FBI and let them sort it out. Your choice. The FBI? Did you really think this was just going to stay a family matter? Marcus has been running a criminal enterprise. He's stolen millions of dollars from dozens of people. This is federal fraud, Claire. This is serious prison time. She was shaking now, actually shaking. What? What do you want us to do? I wanted to call every single person Marcus has stolen from. I want you to confess what you've done. I want you to help them recover their money. And I want you to turn yourselves into the authorities. We can't. Marcus will never. Then I guess you'd better convince him. I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at her. Oh, and Claire? If Marcus is planning anything stupid, like burning down his office to collect insurance money, you'd better talk him out of it. Because if anyone gets hurt, if any evidence gets destroyed, I will personally make sure you both spend the rest of your lives in prison. The look of absolute terror in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. Marcus was absolutely planning something stupid, and now Claire knew I was 10 steps ahead of them. As I drove away from their house, I felt something I hadn't felt in days.
Hope.
Not hope that my family could be repaired, that was broken beyond fixing. But hope that justice was possible. Hope that other families wouldn't have to go through what mine had. Hope that sometimes, when you fight back hard enough and smart enough, the good guys actually win. But I was about to learn that Marcus Hamilton was even more dangerous than I'd realized. And the trap I thought I was setting was about to become a trap for me. I should have known that cornering a desperate criminal would make him more dangerous, not less. But I was so focused on gathering evidence and building my case that I didn't realize how close I was getting to something that could get me killed. The first sign that something was wrong came the next morning. I was at my kitchen table, organizing all the documents and photos Jessica had given me, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Silence for a few seconds, then a man's voice I didn't recognize. You need to stop digging. Excuse me? You heard me. Stop digging, or you're going to find more than you bargained for. The line went dead. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. Someone was watching me, someone who knew what I was doing and wanted me to stop. But who? And how much did they know? I called Sarah immediately. Someone just threatened me. I told her. What kind of threat? I repeated the conversation, and Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Megan, I think it's time to call the FBI. This is getting too dangerous.
Not yet.
I need more evidence first. I need to know exactly how big this is. What you need is to stay alive. If Marcus owes money to the kind of people I think he owes money to, they're not going to care that you're just trying to get your family's money back. But I couldn't stop. Not when I was so close to exposing everything. Not when there were elderly victims out there who might never recover their life savings if Marcus managed to destroy the evidence. That afternoon, I decided to visit some of Marcus's clients myself. Jessica had given me a list of names and addresses, and I started with the ones who lived closest to my apartment. The first address led me to a modest house in southeast Portland, where I met Eleanor Rodriguez, a 78-year-old widow who invited me in for tea and told me the most heartbreaking story I'd heard yet. Marcus seemed so nice, she said, her hands shaking slightly as she poured the tea. He came to my house right after my husband died, said someone at the bank had recommended him. He said he could help me make my retirement money grow so I wouldn't have to worry about outliving my savings. Eleanor had given Marcus power of attorney over her retirement accounts, $180,000 that her husband had saved over 40 years of working construction. Marcus had told her he was investing the money conservatively, in bonds and safe stock funds. Instead, he'd gambled it all on cryptocurrency and high-risk startups. The statements he sent me showed the account growing, she said, showing me a stack of obviously altered documents. Every month, a little more money. I was so grateful to him. When did you find out the truth? Last month. I wanted to withdraw some money to help my daughter with her medical bills, and Marcus kept making excuses about why the money wasn't available. Finally, I went to the bank myself. Eleanor's account balance was $847. Out of $180,000, Marcus had left her with $847. I don't understand how this could happen, she said, tears streaming down her face. David worked so hard for that money. It was supposed to last me the rest of my life. I spent 3 hours with Eleanor, documenting everything she told me, copying all the fake statements Marcus had sent her, and explaining that what had happened to her was a crime that would be prosecuted. But as I left her house, I felt a rage so pure and hot it scared me. This wasn't just about my family anymore. This was about predators who targeted vulnerable elderly people and destroyed their lives for profit. My next stop was James Chin, a 72-year-old retired teacher who'd lost his wife's medical debt savings, $220,000, to Marcus's schemes. Then Dorothy Williams, an 81-year-old former nurse who trusted Marcus with her late husband's life insurance money and now couldn't afford her medications. By the end of the day, I'd spoken to 6 victims. 6 elderly people who'd lost everything because they trusted Marcus Hamilton with their life savings. The total amount stolen from just these 6 people was over $1.2 million. And I was starting to understand that the fake phone call that morning hadn't been about protecting Marcus's fraud scheme. It had been about protecting something much bigger and much more dangerous. That evening, I was at home transcribing my interviews when I heard a car door slam outside. I looked out the window and saw a black SUV parked across the street, engine running. The windows were tinted too dark to see who was inside, but something about it made my skin crawl. I turned off all the lights in my apartment and watched from behind my bedroom curtain. The SUV sat there for almost an hour before finally driving away. Someone was definitely watching me. I called Jessica to warn her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times over the next hour and finally sent her a text. Are you okay? Call me ASAP. She didn't respond. The next morning, I drove to Marcus's office building, but when I got to the 15th floor, I found the Pinnacle Financial Advisor's office completely empty. Not just closed, empty. No furniture, no computers, no files. Just bare walls and carpet impressions where the desks used to be. The building's security guard told me that a moving crew had cleared out the office at 3 a.m.
Strangest thing, he said.
Usually when a business moves, they give us some notice, coordinate with building management. This was like they were trying to disappear in the middle of the night. My heart was pounding. If Marcus had cleared out his office, that meant he was either running or preparing to destroy evidence. Or both. I tried calling Claire, but her phone was disconnected. I tried calling Marcus, same thing. I drove to their house in Lake Oswego and found a for sale sign on the front lawn and all the curtains drawn. They were gone.
But where?
And more importantly, what had they done with Jessica? If you're still watching this, if you're still following this nightmare, I need you to understand something. This is the moment when I realized I wasn't just fighting for my family's money anymore. I wasn't even just fighting for justice for Marcus's elderly victims. I was fighting for my life. Because whatever Marcus had gotten himself into, whoever he owed money to, they saw me as a threat. And threats have a way of disappearing. I called Sarah and told her everything. "We're calling the FBI right now," she said.
Today.
This morning. What about Jessica? What if she's in danger? What if you're in danger? Megan, you need to think about this rationally. You're not a cop, you're not a federal agent, you're a nurse who stumbled into something way bigger than you can handle. She was right, but I couldn't just walk away. Not when there were elderly victims still out there, not when Marcus might be planning to disappear forever with millions of dollars in stolen money, and not when Jessica might be hurt or worse because she tried to help me. "Give me 24 hours, I told Sarah. One more day to see if I can find them. Megan. One day. If I can't find them by tomorrow night, I'll call the FBI myself." Sarah sighed. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't do anything stupid." "I promise." But as I hung up the phone, I was already planning something that probably qualified as stupid. I was going to track down Claire and Marcus, and I was going to make them face the consequences of what they'd done. Not just to my family, but to all their victims. The problem was I had no idea how dangerous the people they owed money to really were. And I had no idea that my investigation had put me directly in their crosshairs. That afternoon, I got a call from Dad. He was at the hospital. "They took Rose," he said, his voice shaky and weak. "What do you mean they took her?" "Two men came to Hillsdale Manor this morning. They had papers, legal documents. They said Rose owed money, and they were transferring her to a different facility until the debt was resolved." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of debt?" "I don't know. The staff at Hillsdale said the men claimed Rose had co-signed on some kind of loan or investment with Marcus, and when the investments failed, she became liable for the losses." "That's impossible. Rose has Alzheimer's. She can't sign legal documents." "I know that, and you know that, but apparently these men had paperwork that looked legitimate. They took her before anyone could verify anything. Rose was being held as collateral for Marcus's debts. An 82-year-old woman with Alzheimer's was being used as leverage to force my family to pay money we didn't have. That's when I understood exactly who I was dealing with. These weren't just loan sharks or garden variety criminals. These were people who would kidnap an elderly woman with dementia to collect on a debt. These were people who would do absolutely anything to get their money back. And they thought I was the key to getting it. As I sat in the hospital waiting room with Dad, watching him struggle to breathe through his panic and fear, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find Rose, and I was going to find Claire and Marcus, and I was going to end this once and for all. But I wasn't going to do it through the legal system anymore. The legal system was too slow, too careful, too concerned with due process. I was going to handle this my way. And my way was going to be thorough, brutal, and absolutely final. If you've ever reached that point where you stop caring about being the good guy and start caring about being the effective guy, then you know exactly what I was feeling. Drop a comment and let me know, when did you stop playing by the rules? Because what I was about to do to save my family was going to cross every line I'd ever drawn for myself. And I couldn't wait to get started. The next 24 hours changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. When someone you love is in danger, when they're being held by people who see human beings as collateral, you discover capabilities within yourself that you never knew existed. Dark capabilities. I started by doing what I did best, gathering information methodically and quietly. The men who took Rose had left a business card with the staff at Hillsdale Manor. Cascade Recovery Services. It sounded legitimate enough, but when I researched the company, I found an address that led to a strip mall in Gresham and a phone number that went to voicemail. But the voicemail gave me something. A voice, an accent, a way of speaking that felt familiar. I recorded it on my phone and played it back several times until I realized where I'd heard that voice before. It was the same voice that had called me 3 days ago to tell me to stop digging. I drove to the strip mall address and found a small office wedged between a nail salon and a payday loan place. The windows were covered with newspaper, but there was a light on inside and 2 cars parked in front. A black SUV that looked exactly like the one that had been watching my apartment, and a white sedan with Oregon plates. I parked across the street and waited. Around 6 p.m., 2 men came out of the office. One was tall and thin with graying hair. The other was shorter and stockier with a shaved head. They got into the SUV and drove away, but not before I got a clear photo of their license plate. Sarah had a contact at the DMV, and within an hour, I had names and addresses for both men. Vincent Kozlov and Frank Morelli. Both had extensive criminal records involving loan sharking, extortion, and various forms of debt collection. But I also discovered something else. They weren't freelance criminals. They worked for a man named Anthony Castellano, who owned several legitimate businesses in Portland, but was widely suspected of running an illegal lending operation targeting gamblers and people with addiction problems. Marcus hadn't just borrowed money from loan sharks. He'd borrowed money from organized crime. And now they had my aunt.
I should have called the FBI then.
I should have called the police. I should have done what any rational person would do when they discovered their family member had been kidnapped by criminals. Instead, I drove home and started planning a rescue operation.
I know how that sounds.
A 32-year-old nurse deciding to take on the mob to rescue her elderly aunt. But you have to understand, by this point, I wasn't thinking like a rational person anymore. I was thinking like someone who'd been pushed past every limit, someone who'd watched her family be systematically destroyed by people who saw other human beings as nothing more than sources of profit. And I had advantages they didn't know about. First, they thought I was just a grieving nurse who'd stumbled onto her sister's crimes. They had no idea I'd been methodically documenting everything for days, that I had contact information for dozens of Marcus's victims, that I knew exactly how extensive his fraud operation had been. Second, they assumed I'd be intimidated by their threats and their show of force. They were wrong. Third, and most importantly, they'd made the mistake of targeting my family. And when you threaten the people I love, I stop being the kind of person who follows rules and starts being the kind of person who wins at any cost. That night, I called Jessica's number one more time. To my surprise, she actually answered. Jessica? Thank God. Are you okay? Megan. Her voice was strange, muffled, and scared. I can't talk long. Where are you? Are you safe? They have me. The same people who took your aunt. They want the files. All the files I copied from Marcus's office. My heart sank. Do you still have them? Hidden. They're hidden somewhere safe. But Megan, they're going to hurt us if you don't stop what you're doing. What exactly do they want? They want Marcus to pay back what he owes, but he doesn't have the money. So they're holding us until he figures out how to get it. And they think you know where he is. I don't know where he is. I know that and you know that, but they don't believe it. They think you're working together. I could hear voices in the background, men's voices speaking in low, threatening tones. Jessica, can you tell me where you are? Any details about the location? I think we're in a warehouse. I can hear trains and there's a smell like chemicals or something industrial. Are you with Rose? My aunt.
Yes.
She's not doing well, Megan. She's confused and scared, and she keeps asking for your mom. The line went dead. I sat there holding my phone, feeling rage build in my chest like a physical thing. These men had kidnapped an 82-year-old woman with Alzheimer's and a 24-year-old who'd only tried to help expose their crimes. They were holding them in some warehouse, terrifying them, using them as leverage to collect on debts they had nothing to do with. But they'd also given me something: trains and industrial smells. In Portland, that narrowed the possibilities down to a few specific areas. Over the next hour, I used Google Maps to identify every warehouse district near railroad tracks. Then I cross-referenced those locations with chemical plants, manufacturing facilities, and industrial complexes that might produce the kinds of smells Jessica had described. By midnight, I had a list of 12 possible locations. By 2 a.m., I'd driven past 8 of them and eliminated them for various reasons: too public, too well-lit, no sign of the vehicles I was looking for. At the 9th location, a warehouse complex near the freight yards in southeast Portland, I found the black SUV parked behind a building that looked like it had been abandoned for years. I parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, staying in the shadows and moving as quietly as I could. The building was surrounded by a chain-link fence, but there was a hole cut in one section that was obviously being used for access. I could see light coming from windows on the 2nd floor, and when I got close enough, I could hear voices. This was it. Rose and Jessica were in that building, being held by men who saw them as nothing more than bargaining chips in a financial dispute they had nothing to do with. That's when I did something I'd never done before in my life. Something that changed who I am at a fundamental level. I called someone I'd never called before, someone whose number I'd gotten years ago, but never thought I'd use. Tom? It's Megan. Tom was my ex-husband, and we'd divorced on terrible terms 2 years ago when I found out he'd been cheating. But Tom was also a Marine, and despite everything that had gone wrong between us, I knew he wouldn't let innocent people get hurt if he could help it. Megan? What the hell? It's 3 in the morning. I need your help. People I care about are in serious danger, and I can't handle this alone. There was a long pause. What kind of danger? I told him everything. The fraud, the theft, the kidnapping, the warehouse where Rose and Jessica were being held. Jesus Christ, Megan. You need to call the police. By the time the police get involved, these people could be dead. Or moved. Or worse. So, what are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help me get them out. Another long pause. This is insane. Yes, it is. But they have an 82-year-old woman with Alzheimer's, Tom. They have a 24-year-old who is just trying to do the right thing. And they're going to hurt them to try to force my family to pay money we don't have. Where are you right now? I gave him the address. Don't do anything until I get there. Do you understand me? Don't go in that building. Don't try to be a hero. Don't do anything stupid until I get there. How long? 20 minutes. While I waited for Tom, I circled the building and counted the vehicles, the exits, the windows that had lights on. I took photos of everything and sent them to Sarah with a message. If something happens to me, this is where Rose and Jessica are being held. When Tom arrived, he was dressed in black and carrying a duffel bag that I suspected contained things I didn't want to know about. How many men? He asked without preamble. At least 2, probably 3. They have guns. What's the plan? Get in, get Rose and Jessica out, get evidence of what's happening here. Tom looked at the building, then at me. You know this is probably going to end badly, right? It's already ended badly. The question is whether we're going to let it get worse. We spent the next 30 minutes planning. Tom would create a distraction at the front of the building while I went in through a back entrance I'd found. I'd locate Rose and Jessica, get them to safety, and call the police once they were secure. It was a simple plan. Too simple, probably. But it was better than letting 2 innocent people stay in the hands of criminals while I waited for the legal system to catch up. As we prepared to go in, Tom grabbed my arm. Megan, once we do this, we're committed. These aren't the kind of people who forgive and forget. You understand that, right? I thought about Rose, confused and terrified, calling for my dead mother. I thought about Jessica, who'd risked her job and her safety to help me expose Marcus's crimes. I thought about all the elderly victims who'd lost their life savings because they'd trusted the wrong person. I understand. Okay then. Let's go get them. But what we found in that warehouse was worse than anything I'd imagined. And what I had to do to get Rose and Jessica out alive crossed every moral line I'd ever drawn for myself. Sometimes, when you're fighting monsters, you have to be willing to become something monstrous yourself. And sometimes, that's the only way to save the people you love. What happened in that warehouse will stay with me for the rest of my life. Tom created his distraction exactly as planned, a small explosive device that blew out a window on the ground floor and drew the attention of everyone inside. While they were investigating the noise and scrambling to figure out what had happened, I slipped in through the back entrance. The building was exactly what Jessica had described, an old warehouse that smelled of chemicals and rust. I could hear the rumble of freight trains in the distance, and the whole place had the feel of somewhere people went to disappear. I found them on the second floor, in what had probably been an office when the building was operational. Rose was sitting in a folding chair, her hands tied, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. She was muttering to herself, asking for my mother, asking when someone was coming to take her home. Jessica was in another chair about 10 feet away, also tied up, but alert and clearly terrified. When she saw me, her eyes went wide with relief and terror. "Megan, you have to get out of here," she whispered. "They're coming back." But I was already untying Rose's hands, trying to calm her down, trying to figure out how I was going to get both of them out of the building without being caught. That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy boots, multiple sets, moving fast. Shit. I breathed, looking around frantically for another exit. But there was only one way out of that room, and that way was blocked. Vincent Kozlov appeared in the doorway first, the tall, thin man I'd seen outside their office. He was holding a gun, and when he saw me kneeling next to Rose, he smiled in a way that made my blood run cold. Well, well, the little nurse decides to play hero. Frank Morelli came up behind him, also armed. "Boss isn't going to like this." "Where's your sister, sweetheart?" Kozlov asked, walking closer. "Where's Claire?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" He backhanded me across the face, and I tasted blood. "Your family owes us a lot of money, and we're running out of patience." "My family doesn't owe you anything. Marcus owes you money. Marcus is married to your sister. Your sister is your father's daughter. Your father has assets we can claim. It's all connected, sweetheart." That's when I understood the full scope of what they were planning. They weren't just going after Marcus. They were going after my entire family. Dad's house, his remaining savings, anything they could legally or illegally claim to satisfy Marcus's debts. "How much does he owe you?" $2.7 million, plus interest and penalties. Call it $3 million even. $3 million. My family's entire net worth, everything Dad had worked his whole life to build, wouldn't cover half of what Marcus owed these people. "We don't have that kind of money." Kozlov shrugged. "Then you'd better figure out how to get it. Because the old lady and the girl here are going to stay with us until you do. And if we can't..." He smiled again, and this time I could see exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. "Then we start sending pieces of them back to you until you get motivated." That's when something inside me snapped completely. Maybe it was seeing Rose tied to that chair, confused and scared, being threatened by men who saw her as nothing more than leverage. Maybe it was thinking about Jessica, who'd only tried to help, being tortured because of my family's problems. Maybe it was the realization that these men were never going to stop, that they'd keep taking from my family until there was nothing left to take. Whatever it was, I stopped being afraid and started being angry. Really, truly, dangerously angry. "Let them go," I said, standing up slowly. "Excuse me?" "Let them go, and I'll help you get your money back." Kozlov laughed. "You'll help us? How exactly are you going to do that, sweetheart?" "I know where Marcus is." The room went dead quiet. "You know where he is?" "I know where he is, I know where the money is, and I know how to get it back for you." It was a complete lie, but I needed to buy time, needed to get Rose and Jessica away from these men before Tom's distraction wore off and they started focusing on us again. Talk. Not here. Not with them listening. Let them go, and I'll tell you everything. Kozlov looked at Morelli, and I could see him calculating. He wanted the information I claimed to have, but he didn't trust me enough to let his leverage go. "Here's what we're going to do," he said finally. "You're going to tell me what you know right now, and if I like what I hear, maybe these two get to keep all their fingers." That's when the lights went out. Tom had cut the power to the building. In the complete darkness, I heard Kozlov cursing, heard Morelli stumbling around trying to find a flashlight or his phone. I used the confusion to grab Rose's arm and guide her toward where I remembered the door being. "Jessica, move," I hissed. I heard her chair scraping against the floor as she tried to stand with her hands still tied. But we weren't fast enough. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and Kozlov's voice was full of rage. "Nobody moves or I start shooting." The beam found me first, then swept to Rose, then to Jessica. "Very clever, sweetheart. But now you've pissed me off." He grabbed Jessica by the hair and put his gun to her head. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly where Marcus is, or this little girl's brains are going to paint the wall." I could see Jessica's terrified face in the flashlight beam. I could see Rose trembling beside me, completely lost and afraid. I could see Morelli moving to block the only exit. And I realized that talking wasn't going to get us out of this. "Okay," I said. "Okay. I'll tell you everything." Smart girl. "But first, let me check on my aunt. She has medical conditions, and I need to make sure she's okay." "You have 30 seconds. I knelt down next to Rose, pretending to check her pulse, while actually palming the small knife I kept in my medical bag. It wasn't much, just a basic scalpel I used for first aid, but it was sharp and it was all I had. "She's okay," I said, standing up slowly. "Now talk." "Marcus is in Seattle. He's staying with a friend named David Chen, and he's got at least $500,000 in cash hidden in a storage unit." Another complete lie, but Kozlov was listening intently. "What storage unit? Where?" "I don't know the exact location, but I can find out. I have the key." "What key?" I reached into my bag as if I was looking for something, then moved fast. The scalpel went into Kozlov's wrist, the one holding the gun. He screamed and dropped the weapon, and I dove for it while shouting to Jessica to run. But Morelli was faster than I expected. His gun was out and aimed at me before I could reach Kozlov's weapon. "Nice try, bitch." That's when Tom came through the door, like a force of nature. What happened next was violent and brutal and over very quickly. Tom had military training and no patience for people who threatened innocent civilians. Within 30 seconds, both men were on the ground, disarmed and incapacitated. I won't describe the details of what Tom did to them. I'll just say that when it was over, Vincent Kozlov and Frank Morelli were in no condition to threaten anyone ever again. "We need to go," Tom said, helping Rose to her feet while I untied Jessica's hands.
"Now."
But as we were heading for the exit, I stopped. "Wait, Megan, we don't have time." "The files." Jessica said they wanted the files from Marcus's office. I looked at Kozlov, who was conscious, but in obvious pain. "Where are they?" "Go to hell," he muttered. I picked up his gun and pointed it at him. "Where are the files?" Jessica copied. "You won't shoot me." I moved the barrel to point at his kneecap. "Wanna bet?" Something in my voice must have convinced him I was serious. "Safe. In the office downstairs." "What's the combination?" When he hesitated, I pressed the gun against his knee. 072889. "Jessica, stay with Rose and Tom. I'll be right back." I found the safe in what had been the building's main office. Inside were dozens of files, not just Jessica's copies of Marcus's documents, but records of other victims, other fraud schemes, evidence of a criminal enterprise that was much larger than I'd imagined. And something else. A list of names and addresses titled Collection Priority, with my father's name at the top, followed by amounts owed and notes about asset recovery strategies. They'd been planning to systematically destroy my entire family. When I got back upstairs, Tom was applying first aid to a cut on Jessica's forehead while Rose sat in a corner, rocking back and forth and calling for my mother. "Did you get what you need?" Tom asked. "More than I needed." "Good. Because we're about to have company." I could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. "Someone called the cops?" I did. About 5 minutes ago. Figured we'd need backup to get out of this clean. As we helped Rose and Jessica down the stairs, I looked back at the two men we were leaving behind. They were both alive, both conscious, both in pain. But they weren't going to be threatening anyone for a while. What happens to them? Jessica asked. What happens to them is they get arrested for kidnapping, extortion, and about 50 other charges. What happens after that is up to the legal system. But I knew what was really going to happen to them. Once the FBI saw the evidence in that safe, once they understood the scope of the criminal enterprise these men had been running, Kozlov and Morelli were going to prison for the rest of their lives. And that was just the beginning of my revenge. As we waited for the police to arrive, I looked through the files I'd taken from the safe. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Marcus hadn't just been stealing from my family and his elderly clients. He'd been the front man for a criminal organization that had been systematically targeting vulnerable people for years. But now I had evidence. I had names, dates, bank records, forged documents, everything the FBI would need to build airtight cases against everyone involved, including Claire. As the police cars pulled up outside the warehouse, as the paramedics started checking on Rose and Jessica, as Tom gave his statement about what had happened, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks.
Peace.
Not happiness. What had happened to my family was too devastating for happiness. But peace in knowing that justice was finally possible. Peace in knowing that the people who'd hurt my family and so many others were going to face consequences. Most importantly, peace in knowing that I'd been strong enough to fight back and win. If you've made it this far in the story, if you've followed me through all the betrayal and rage and violence, I want you to know something. Sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones closest to you. Sometimes the system fails, and you have to create your own justice. Sometimes being a good person means being willing to do terrible things to protect the people you love. Share this video if you've ever had to become someone you didn't recognize to save someone you couldn't live without. Because what I did in that warehouse changed me forever, and I'm still not sure if it changed me for better or for worse. But I saved Rose. I saved Jessica. And I got enough evidence to destroy everyone who tried to destroy my family. The only question was what I was going to do with it. The FBI raid on the warehouse complex happened 3 days later, but by then I'd already set much larger wheels in motion. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez sat across from me in a sterile conference room at the federal building downtown, looking through the files I'd recovered from Kozlov's safe with a kind of focused intensity that told me she understood exactly what she was seeing. Mrs. Collins, do you understand what you've given us here? Evidence of a criminal conspiracy involving financial fraud, elder abuse, kidnapping, and money laundering. That's understating it considerably. She held up a thick folder. What you've given us is evidence of a criminal organization that's been operating in 3 states for at least 5 years. We're looking at hundreds of victims and millions of dollars in losses. I sat quietly while she flipped through page after page of forged documents, altered bank statements, and victim profiles. Some of the names I recognized from my own investigation, but many I didn't. Elderly people, disabled people, recent immigrants, people who trusted the wrong person and lost everything they had. Your sister and her husband weren't just stealing from your family, Agent Martinez continued. They were part of a much larger operation. Marcus was one of several financial advisors who were funneling money to Castellano's organization through fraudulent investments and loans. What does that mean for Claire? Agent Martinez looked at me carefully. It means she's facing federal charges for conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and elder abuse. We're talking about serious prison time.
I should have felt something when she said that.
Sadness, maybe, or regret. Claire's my sister. Despite everything she'd done, we'd grown up together, shared secrets, built blanket forts in the living room where Dad and I had confronted her about the stolen money. But all I felt was cold satisfaction. When will you arrest her? We're working on locating her first. Do you have any idea where she and Marcus might have gone?
No.
But I might know someone who does. I pulled out my phone and showed Agent Martinez the contact information I'd gotten from Jessica for Marcus's assistant at his previous job, a woman named Patricia who'd worked with him for 3 years before he started Pinnacle Financial. She might know about properties they own, places they might run to, people who might help them. We'll look into it. In the meantime, I need to ask you about what happened at the warehouse. This was the conversation I'd been dreading. Tom and I had discussed our story carefully, but there were aspects of that night that were hard to explain in ways that didn't make us sound like vigilantes. You and your ex-husband decided to conduct a rescue operation without involving law enforcement. Can you explain that decision? My aunt is 82 years old with Alzheimer's. Jessica is a 24-year-old who was only involved because she tried to help me expose Marcus's crimes. These men were threatening to torture them if I didn't produce money my family doesn't have. I didn't think we had time to wait for official channels. And your ex-husband just happened to have the skills and equipment necessary for this kind of operation?
Tom is a Marine.
When I explained what was happening, he felt obligated to help. Agent Martinez made some notes, then closed the folder she'd been reviewing. Mrs. Collins, I want to be very clear about something. What you did was extremely dangerous and could have gotten you killed. It also could have compromised our investigation if you destroyed evidence or allowed the suspects to escape. But it didn't. No, it didn't. In fact, the evidence you recovered is going to allow us to prosecute not just the people who hurt your family, but an entire criminal network. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next. What do you mean? I mean that when this story goes public, when we start arresting people and seizing assets, you're going to be at the center of a very big, very messy legal proceeding. Your sister is going to prison. Your family's private business is going to be examined in court. And the people we're going after have connections that extend well beyond Portland.
I thought about that.
I thought about Dad having to testify about how his daughter had stolen from him. I thought about Rose having to relive her kidnapping in a courtroom. I thought about seeing Claire in handcuffs, being led away to serve what would probably be a 20-year sentence. I'm prepared for that. Are you sure? Agent Martinez, they stole my mother's Ireland money. They stole my aunt's dignity. They stole the retirement savings of people who trusted them. I'm not just prepared for what comes next. I'm looking forward to it. She smiled for the first time since we'd started talking.
Good.
Because we're going to need your help to make sure we get all of them. Over the next week, I became an unofficial consultant to the FBI's investigation. I helped them identify victims, explained Marcus's methods, and provided context for the evidence we'd recovered from the warehouse. I also learned things about Claire that broke what was left of my heart. She hadn't just stolen from our family. She'd been actively recruiting new victims for Marcus's schemes. Elderly members of her book club, neighbors from their upscale neighborhood, even some of Dad's friends from church. She'd used her relationship with our family to gain trust, then exploited that trust to funnel money to Marcus's fake investment opportunities. Mrs. Henderson from down the street had lost $40,000. Mr. Garcia, who'd done yard work for Dad for 15 years, had lost his entire savings. Claire's book club friend Linda had mortgaged her house to invest with Marcus and was now facing foreclosure. The woman I'd thought was my sister, the person I'd trusted most in the world, had been systematically destroying the lives of people who'd known and trusted our family for years. But I also learned something else, something that changed everything about how I saw what had happened to us. Claire had been skimming money from Dad's accounts for almost 3 years. Not 18 months, like I'd originally thought. She'd started stealing from him just months after Mom's diagnosis, when Dad was overwhelmed with medical bills and grief, and wasn't paying close attention to his finances. She'd been stealing from our dying mother's husband while our mother was fighting cancer. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. I'd been thinking of Claire as someone who'd made desperate choices in a crisis, but the timeline made it clear that she'd been planning this for years. She'd seen Mom's illness as an opportunity to steal from Dad while he was distracted. The betrayal wasn't just deep, it was calculated, methodical, and utterly heartless. When Agent Martinez showed me the evidence of the 3-year timeline, I asked for a moment alone. I went to the bathroom in the federal building and threw up, then sat on the floor and cried for 20 minutes. Not for Claire. I was done crying for Claire. I cried for the person I'd thought she was, the sister I'd loved who had never really existed. That afternoon, they found her. Claire and Marcus were arrested at a motel in Boise, Idaho, trying to cross into Canada with fake passports and approximately $180,000 in cash. The money was traced back to the sale of jewelry and artwork from their Lake Oswego house, assets they'd liquidated in the days after I'd confronted them at Dad's house. Agent Martinez called me personally to let me know about the arrests. They're being extradited back to Portland. Claire's being held without bail because of the flight risk. Marcus is in federal custody pending trial. When do I get to see her? You don't have to see her if you don't want to. This isn't about reconciliation, Mrs. Collins. This is about justice. But I did want to see her. I wanted to look her in the eye and ask her how she'd justified what she'd done. I wanted to understand how someone I'd loved and trusted could have become the kind of person who stole from her own dying mother's husband. Most importantly, I wanted her to see what she'd turned me into. I wanted her to see the cold, ruthless person who'd emerged from the wreckage of our family, the person who'd been willing to walk into a warehouse full of armed criminals to save people she loved. I wanted her to understand that her betrayal hadn't just destroyed our family, it had created an enemy who was smarter, more determined, and more dangerous than she could have imagined. The visiting room at the Multnomah County Detention Center was exactly what you'd expect: fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, reinforced glass separating the inmates from their visitors. When Claire walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, I barely recognized her. She'd lost weight, her hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was pale and drawn. But it was her eyes that looked different. The confidence was gone, the sense of entitlement that had always been part of her personality. She looked broken.
Good.
She picked up the phone on her side of the glass, and I picked up mine. Megan. Her voice was barely a whisper. Claire. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I'm so sorry. For what specifically? She blinked, clearly not expecting that question. For all of it. For stealing from Dad. For lying to you. For stealing from Mom. Claire went very still.
What?
The FBI showed me the timeline. You started stealing from Dad 3 years ago, right after Mom was diagnosed. You've been stealing from our family since she was dying. Megan, it wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. While I was taking care of Mom, while Dad was dealing with medical bills and treatments and watching the love of his life fade away, you were stealing from him. Claire started crying, but I felt nothing watching her tears. I was desperate, she whispered. Marcus said if I didn't help him, he'd leave me, and I couldn't handle being alone, and I thought I could pay it back before anyone found out. You recruited victims from Dad's church. You stole from people who trusted our family because they trusted him. I know it was wrong, but… There is no but, Claire. There's no excuse, no justification, no explanation that makes what you did okay. She was sobbing now, ugly, desperate sobs that shook her whole body. What do you want from me? What can I do to make this right? I leaned forward, so she could see my face clearly through the glass. Nothing. You can't make this right. You destroyed our family. You destroyed Dad's retirement. You traumatized an 82-year-old woman with Alzheimer's, and you hurt dozens of innocent people who trusted you.
There's no coming back from that.
Please, Megan, you're my sister?
No.
I was your sister. The person sitting across from you now is the person you created when you decided to steal from our family. The person who walked into a warehouse full of armed criminals to save Aunt Rose. The person who's going to make sure you spend the next 20 years in prison thinking about what you did. Claire stared at me through the glass, and I could see the exact moment when she realized that the sister she'd known was gone forever. I love you, she whispered. I hung up the phone and walked away without looking back. But as I left the detention center, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not peace, not closure. Emptiness. The revenge I'd wanted so badly had left me hollow inside, like I'd won a war but lost everything worth fighting for. And I was starting to realize that destroying Claire wasn't going to be enough to fill that emptiness. Not even close. 6 months later, I sat in the back row of a federal courthouse in Portland, watching my sister get sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The courtroom was packed with victims, elderly people who'd lost their life savings, families whose retirements had been stolen, people whose trust had been exploited by someone who'd seemed so respectable, so trustworthy. I recognized some of them from my own investigation. Eleanor Rodriguez, who'd lost her husband's construction savings, James Chun, the retired teacher, Dorothy Williams, the former nurse who could no longer afford her medications. They'd all come to see justice done. Claire stood at the defendant's table in a conservative blue suit, flanked by her court-appointed attorneys. She looked older, thinner, smaller than the person who'd sat across from me at our weekly coffee dates talking about her perfect life with Marcus. When Judge Patricia Nakamura asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, Claire stood slowly and turned to face the courtroom. "I want to apologize to everyone I hurt," she said, her voice barely audible. "To my father, to my sister, to all the clients who trusted me with their futures. I know my actions were inexcusable. I know I've destroyed lives, including my own family's. I can't undo what I've done, but I want everyone to know that I'll spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make amends." It was a good speech. Probably written by her lawyers, definitely rehearsed. But when she looked back at me in that moment before sitting down, I saw something in her eyes that made my chest tighten. She looked like she was drowning. Judge Nakamura sentenced Claire to 18 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 12 years. Marcus got 25 years. Vincent Kozlov and Frank Morelli got life sentences, without parole. After the hearing, I stood in the courthouse hallway watching the victims and their families celebrate. Eleanor Rodriguez was crying with relief. James Chun was shaking hands with the prosecutor. Dorothy Williams was hugging her daughter, talking about how justice had finally been served. They were right to celebrate. Justice had been served. The people who'd hurt them were going to prison, and a criminal organization that had been operating for years had been destroyed. But I didn't feel like celebrating. Dad appeared beside me, looking older than his 70 years. The stress of the investigation, the trial, and the public scrutiny had aged him dramatically. He testified against Claire 2 weeks earlier, describing in detail how she'd systematically stolen from him while Mom was dying. It was the hardest thing I'd ever watched him do. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Empty," he said. "I thought this would make me feel better, but it just feels empty." I knew exactly what he meant. "Dad, we did the right thing." "I know we did. That doesn't make it hurt less." Agent Martinez came over to where we were standing. Over the months of investigation and trial preparation, she'd become something like a friend. She was one of the few people who understood what this case had cost my family emotionally. "How are you two holding up?" "We're surviving," I said. "The Victims' Compensation Fund should start issuing payments within the next few months. We're covered about 60% of the stolen money, and it'll be distributed proportionally based on losses." That was something, at least. Dad would get back most of what Claire had stolen from him, though not in time for the Ireland trip Mom had dreamed about. Aunt Rose would get the money for proper care, though she'd probably never understand why she'd been moved to that terrible facility in the first place. "What happens to Claire now?" Dad asked. "She'll serve her time at the federal prison in Dublin, California. Minimum security, mostly white-collar criminals. She'll be eligible for parole in 12 years if she maintains good behavior." 12 years. Claire would be 47 when she got out if she got out. Dad would be 80. Rose would probably be gone. I'd be 44, and this whole nightmare would finally be behind us. "Maybe." "Agent Martinez," I said. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think this was worth it? All the pain, all the broken relationships, all the damage that can never be repaired?" She was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Mrs. Collins, I've been investigating financial crimes for 15 years. I've seen what happens when people like your sister and Marcus go unpunished. They don't stop. They find new victims, they refine their methods, they get bolder and more destructive. The criminal organization we destroyed was expanding into human trafficking and drug money laundering. If you hadn't exposed them, dozens more families would have been destroyed." I nodded, understanding intellectually that she was right. But understanding something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two very different things. That evening, I went to visit Rose at the memory care facility we'd moved her to after recovering the stolen money. It was a beautiful place with gardens and art therapy and staff who treated the residents with dignity and kindness. It was everything the state facility hadn't been. Rose was sitting in the common area, looking through a photo album I'd made for her with pictures from her life. When she saw me, her face lit up with recognition. "Lily's girl," she said, reaching out to squeeze my hand.
Hi, Aunt Rose.
"How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine, dear. When is Lily coming to visit?" "She said she'd be here this week." I'd had this conversation with Rose dozens of times over the past 6 months. Sometimes I corrected her, reminded her that Mom was gone. But today, I didn't have the heart for it. "She'll be here soon," I said instead. We sat together for an hour, looking through the photo album and talking about memories that Rose could still access. Her childhood, her wedding, the years when she and Mom had been young women together, planning their futures and dreaming about the lives they'd build. As I was getting ready to leave, Rose grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "That nice man who used to come see me," she said. "The one who was taking care of my money. He stopped coming. Did something happen to him?" For a moment, I considered lying to her, protecting her from the truth about what Marcus had done. But Rose deserved better than lies, even comfortable ones. "He wasn't taking care of your money, Aunt Rose. He was stealing it. But we caught him, and he's in prison now. You're safe." Rose nodded slowly, and for just a moment, I saw complete clarity in her eyes. "Good," she said. "People who hurt families should face consequences." Driving home from the memory care facility, I thought about what Rose had said. People who hurt families should face consequences. Claire had faced consequences. Marcus had faced consequences. The criminal organization they'd been part of had been destroyed. Justice had been served. So why did I still feel so hollow inside? I think it's because revenge, even justified revenge, even legal revenge, comes with a cost that nobody talks about. When you decide to fight back, when you decide to pursue justice at any cost, you have to be willing to become someone harder than you were before. Someone willing to walk into warehouses full of armed criminals. Someone willing to destroy their own sister's life. Someone willing to prioritize justice over mercy, consequences over forgiveness. The person who'd started this journey 6 months ago, the nurse who cried when she found out her sister had betrayed her, that person was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more determined, more dangerous. Someone who'd won a war but lost pieces of her soul in the process. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw a familiar car parked on the street. Tom was sitting on my front porch, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking like he had something important to say. "Hey," he said, handing me one of the cups as I sat down beside him. "Hey yourself. What are you doing here?" "I wanted to check on you. Today was the sentencing, right? 18 years for Claire. 25 for Marcus. How do you feel?" I sipped my coffee and thought about how to answer that question honestly. Like I won a war, but lost everything worth fighting for. Tom nodded. "That's normal, you know. After combat, after something traumatic, there's often a period where you feel disconnected from everything. Like you're living someone else's life. Is that what this is? Maybe. Or maybe it's just the natural consequence of having to become someone you never wanted to be in order to protect the people you love." We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the Portland skyline. Finally, Tom spoke again. "Megan, I want you to know something. What you did, exposing the fraud, saving Rose and Jessica, bringing down that criminal organization, it was the right thing to do. It was brave and necessary and important. Then why do I feel like I lost myself somewhere along the way? Because that's the price of justice sometimes. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you pieces of who you used to be, but that doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing." I thought about all the victims who'd gotten their money back, all the future victims who'd been saved from Marcus's schemes, all the families who wouldn't be destroyed because a criminal organization had been stopped. Maybe Tom was right. Maybe the hollowness I felt was just the natural aftermath of a necessary war. Maybe, in time, I'd be able to build a new version of myself on the foundation of what was left. Or maybe some battles cost more than they're worth, even when you win them. 6 months later, I got a letter from Claire. It was the first communication I'd had with her since our conversation at the detention center, and part of me wanted to throw it away without reading it. But I opened it anyway. Dear Megan, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand if you throw this letter away without reading it. But I needed to try to tell you some things that I couldn't say in court. Asterisk first, I want you to know that I understand now what I really did to our family. Not just the money, I understand that I destroyed something sacred. Trust, love, the belief that family means something more than just shared DNA. I took all of that away from you and Dad, and I can never give it back. Asterisk second, I want you to know that I'm grateful for what you did. Not just exposing the fraud, but stopping us before we hurt even more people. I've met women in here who are victims of financial crimes, and I see what it does to people. I see how it destroys their faith in humanity. You saved dozens of people from that fate. Asterisk finally, I want you to know that I think about you every day. I think about the sister you used to be, the person who trusted people and believed in family and always looked for the good in everyone. I know that person is gone because of what I did to her. I know I created the person who was strong enough to bring me down, and I know that creation cost you more than I'll ever understand. Asterisk, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to write back. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I took from you, and I'm sorry for all of it. Asterisk, your sister, Claire. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. She was right about one thing. The person I used to be was gone. The trusting, optimistic nurse who'd started this journey had been replaced by someone harder, more suspicious, more willing to fight back when threatened. But maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The old Megan had been vulnerable to people like Claire and Marcus. She'd been someone who could be taken advantage of, someone whose trust could be exploited, someone who might have spent her whole life being victimized by people who saw her kindness as weakness. The new Megan was someone who fought back. Someone who protected the people she loved. Someone who wouldn't let criminals destroy her family without consequences. Maybe the price I'd paid for justice, losing the person I used to be, was worth it if it meant other families wouldn't have to go through what mine had. Maybe becoming someone harder was the only way to survive in a world where the people closest to you might be the ones planning to destroy you. Or maybe I was just trying to justify what I'd become, because the alternative was admitting that winning had cost me more than losing would have. I honestly don't know. What I do know is this. If someone threatens my family again, if someone tries to take advantage of the people I love, they'll discover that the gentle nurse who used to give everyone the benefit of the doubt is gone forever. In her place is someone who's willing to walk into warehouses full of armed criminals, someone who's willing to destroy her own sister's life to protect innocent victims, someone who's learned that sometimes the only way to stop monsters is to be willing to become something monstrous yourself. And if that makes me the villain in someone else's story, I can live with that. Because my family is safe. The victims got their justice. And the people who hurt them are never going to hurt anyone ever again. That has to be enough. Even if it's not enough to fill the emptiness where my sister used to be. Even if it's not enough to bring back the person I was before I learned that family doesn't always mean what you think it means. Even if it's not enough to make me feel like I won anything worth winning. Justice was served. The good guys won. And sometimes that's all you get. Sometimes that has to be enough. Thank you for following my story to the end. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever had to choose between justice and mercy, if you've ever won a war but felt like you lost yourself in the process, please share this video. Because the hardest battles we fight aren't against strangers, they're against the people who are supposed to love us. And sometimes, winning those battles costs us more than we ever imagined. But sometimes, they're still worth fighting. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. You never know when the person you trust most might be planning to destroy everything you've built. Subscribe if this story meant something to you. And remember, family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up when everything falls apart. Until next time.